The Evil Within. Walking down the street in the mid-80s, Jason was daydreaming while trying to find a friend's house named Freddie, who lives on the back street near the bayou where all the rich people could afford health care. It's summer and it's a grueling 108 degrees, and Jason is only 15 years old. As he walks to Freddie Bogger's house, who was an older kid and a pretty cool guy. He was a little soft-spoken for a rocker by all accounts, even with the long hair to match. Not for fear of being called a hippie or anything like that. The simple fact was that Jason was not allowed to grow long hair like a girl. This is a critical point in time when Jason is starting to feel the full effects of puberty and street drugs with which he was experimenting. Jason met Brian in the 5th grade in their little suburb in the city of Houston. The whole area was Anglo, and it was very tame compared to the way it is now. Kids learned all of those neighborhood streets and every surrounding neighborhood for miles. You see, that was their job, to ride bicycles and to get sweaty. Jason is about halfway to Freddie's house as he remembers it clearly in his head. The guy lives right along the bayou, which is basically a man-made river. These bayous run all through Houston as arteries as they empty into the Gulf of Mexico. They're mostly runoff water from the streets after flooding. Jason rounds the very last corner in his much-hidden neighborhood with really nice houses. Back in the early 80s, houses of that type were pretty decent for middle-class people like Jason and his friends. He was always a humble guy, and he tried to respect everything. Earlier that morning, Jason got a call from Freddie Bogger, the disco duck. Jason and Brian were friends, and they were the same age, but Brian had an older brother who had a lot of other friends. These guys were average of 5 years older than the other boys were, so they were very crucial elements for the young boys' development. Both the boys soaked in as much information as they could, laughed a lot, and partied a lot. Really, Jason and Brian were lucky that these guys would even let them hang out with them because they were so young, and nowadays it is illegal to contribute to delinquency to minors, as it was back then. Since Brian was a clown, Jason was never picked on. He rolled with the entertainment. Jason had smoked marijuana before, so it wasn't a new thing to him, although he had just started maybe a year prior in small amounts. Jason always wanted to expand his imagination and learn in ways that people couldn't readily explain. Not all learning has to do with reading books or memorizing information. A lot of learning is actually recreational when you are in a state of bliss and total peace and at one with the universe. This is something the grown-ups never understood, and Jason got blue in the face trying to tell them, but now things are starting to turn around and they are being realized. Jason rounds the last corner as he sees Freddie's house. The house is pretty big. It's 2 stories and built in the 70s or 80s, like most of the houses were that Jason had grown up in. Except this one was a little bit better and strange in small ways that only Jason noticed and never seen again. To start, there were no actual doors anywhere on the house. All they had in the front and back, upstairs and downstairs, were glass sliding doors. Not that this is very unique or strange, but it was very peculiar the way that the house was custom made to where it only had glass sliding doors upstairs and downstairs, front and back. All the entrances to the house were solid glass, as if to let spirits in at will, like a ghost doggy door. He chuckles at the mental picture. The house was probably only a 6-bedroom at the most, but it was very nice. They had a big piece of property in the backyard that was connected to the bayou, and their yard was open with all the other yards in the back, creating one huge yard that went all along the bayou on both sides. Freddie also had a swimming pool, which most people did not have in a middle-class neighborhood. Jason was called earlier that morning by Freddie and invited to his house to go swimming since it was so hot outside. That call started the thoughts into motion that Jason had plenty of time to think about while he was walking 8 or 10 blocks to this guy's house in the middle of summer. He starts thinking about how he met Freddie and the peculiar circumstances around all that. When Jason first met Freddie, it was though his friend Brian and older brothers were there with them. Freddie and his family were filthy rich. The mom was a physician and she had long white hair and went all the way down to the ground. Very weird looking. Of course, she would have it up a lot, but she did have it down a few times and it did touch the floor. The father was a nuclear physicist that worked at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at NASA, and things were very mysterious around that. Freddie also had a sister that was around 18 years old, Freddie's same age. She lived with them as well, and she had jet black hair that went all the way to the floor, as well as her mom's. Now, if all these facts didn't surprise you by now, then it will. When Jason was with Brian and the older boys, they were outside the backyard, which played out a horrible scene. Freddie's family had 3 huge dogs. They resembled sheepdogs because they were very large and very hairy. They reached Jason's chest, but they were very nice animals and they were well groomed. These were inside dogs and they were family pets. When all 3 boys were standing outside, suddenly they saw the 3 shepherd dogs that were walking around the backyard creeping. Jason was standing next to Steve, which was Brian's older brother. Steve is over 6 feet tall, while Jason and Brian were both under 6 foot. It resembled a forest of some kind, and they were very soon surprised at what happened next. As the guys were standing there talking, the 3 dogs walked by single file, and as the last dog passes the boys, Steve, which is the tallest, mumbled kind of loudly that they were ugly-ass dogs. They may have been very expensive and well-groomed, but the way that Steve said it was just hilarious. Not to mention that they had all been smoking weed. This by itself was very funny. But as he finished saying this remark, the last dog, without breaking a stride, kicked his left rear leg up as he passed Steve, at the precise angle, velocity, and timing to rack him square in the balls. The sudden onslaught by the hairy beast without a sound rendered Steve helpless on the floor, crying like a little girl. Jason and Brian were hysterical on the floor at this point, still laughing. They were bouncing all around the pine trees, trying not to pee on themselves from laughing so hard. At first, Jason just thought it was a joke, but to see the dog kick bring him to his knees was priceless. The time before that, when Jason was at Freddie's house, the older boys would always talk about Freddie's family being witches. They would joke with him, and Freddie would just blow it off or change the subject. Freddie was a rocker, had a nice car, and lived in a very nice house with his parents. The parents had full Rolls Royces in the driveway. As the boys walk into the house after the disc dog fiasco, Brian is telling Jason that the dogs were actually human but under a spell. The story was that Freddie's family are witches and that the mother had such long hair as the sisters as well. By the family was so eccentric, but there could have been more to it. At first, Jason thought that they had nothing better to do with their intoxication from marijuana, but after a while, fact and fiction seemed to blend together. What's real and what's fake, or who's friend and who's enemy, or what's true and what's all a lie. Nevertheless, Jason was very open-minded and very people-oriented. He got along with everybody, but he did pay attention to these anomalies. As they're all walking into the main house through the glass sliding door, Brian is telling Jason that he had walked into the house by himself one time, and the dogs were sitting on the couch, on their butts, with their legs crossed and their arms out on the couch like humans. Jason was pretty stoned, and just the thought of that picture was hilarious. He caught a mental picture just as he was walking into the house. Jason was first in line, and they were all filing in behind him. He was still thinking about the dog thing when he reached the glass door, pulled it, and walked into the living room. Lo and behold, as he sticks his head in the glass door and looks into the living room, indeed, there is a dog sitting on the couch with his legs up, and Jason could not believe it. He's suddenly thrust into the twilight zone. As soon as the dog saw him, the dog jumped down and started acting like normal, like nothing ever happened. But it was too late. Jason already saw the truth. He starts thinking about what else may be true, like the witches and other things not yet pondered. Jason's mind is racing at this point, but still, he tells the other boys what he saw. They're all laughing at him and telling him that they told him so. Jason still thought it had to be a joke, like being punked way before Ashton. Even though he saw this with his own two eyes, he still couldn't believe it. As he's weighing all these ratios and factors into his equations and in his head, he's sitting down in the living room of a normal-looking room with friends. He's talking to Brian when he happens to glance down at the coffee table, which had glass over the top. He sees some books and magazines inside the table. As Brian is still jabbering, Jason reaches down and grabs the first book on top of the pile. The book is very large, leather-bound, and it has hand-drawn art on it like portraits. And the cover reads, How to Conjure Satan. Maybe they're gothic, or maybe it's close to Halloween. But none of these things were true, and Jason knew it because these people had way too much money to be acting stupid like that, and they never even cracked a smile. They could have been animated cyborgs or undead servants. As an example, Jason was there one time in Freddy's apartment, which is on top of the garage of the parents' house. In other words, the kid had his own house, basically. Nobody ever messed with him. He had his own kitchen and everything he needed up there. Once in a while, the mother would harass Freddy on the telephone and recite things that were said while she was not there. One time, the mom came upstairs and knocked on the door while they were snorting lines of cocaine. They wrote their names in cursive with the cocaine. This was the very first time that Jason did coke, and soon after the mother comes upstairs, bangs on the door, and somehow knows about the names on the coke that they had just got rid of in panic. They all assumed that she had the place bugged with wiretaps and microphones, maybe even cameras. These people were rich, so they could afford any kind of surveillance they wanted. All these small clues seemed to hint towards witchcraft or maybe eccentricity, like the Addams family. Nevertheless, Jason does not judge people, and he liked Freddy because he was a cool guy. So he goes over there alone that day. As Jason is walking up the driveway, he remembers that Freddy told him nobody would be home all day. He walks up and knocks on the door and goes in, and they briefly hang out in the apartment and then go downstairs into the swimming pool in the backyard. As they are in the pool, Jason notices that a girl comes walking towards the pool and realizes it's Freddy's sister, which he had never seen before. Jason had just seen pictures of her, and when he sees the girl, instantly he has a flashback about the day when he was sitting on the couch looking at the book. When he picked up the book that day, the cover of the book was about witchcraft and had a painting that looked exactly like Freddy's mom with the long white hair standing on front cover. Painted behind the lady was a goat. The goat was standing upright, appearing to be the devil and committing sodomy on the woman in the portrait. Jason was dumbfounded when he saw the book. What kind of people would read these books? As he opened the books and flipped to the middle pages, there was another full-page painting of Freddy's sister with the long black hair but in a different position having sex with the same goat. The caption read, How to Make Love to Satan. Jason liked rock and roll music back then, but he was not a devil worshiper or anything like that, close to that. Those people were grown adults and seemed to be very into it. The sister walks outside and sits on a pool lawn chair while she has a newborn baby in her arms. The baby is a bright red color as if it had been sunburned. Anyone who has a baby knows you should not have them outside in the sunlight without any clothes. The lady has a days-old baby in her arms, butt naked and bright red like a lobster. The baby couldn't have been more than a couple of days old, and she sat on the lawn chair and started chanting something in a language he had never heard. He knows most languages by sound, but this was not Italian, and he has no clue, but it was a ritual. As she was sitting there with the naked baby in the sun, Jason remembers that they had a real crystal ball inside the house, and he couldn't help wondering who the baby daddy was. No other males were ever around. Could this have been the spawn of Satan, like the book suggested? A couple of months later, Freddy throws a party when his parents are out of town. Jason does not go to the party, but he is there when the parents confront Freddy about the damage. There may have been 5 to 10 people inside Freddy's apartment, but when the parents came up, they were still visibly upset. They explained that during the party, somebody had stolen the hubcaps of the Rolls-Royce Phantom. Rolls-Royce hubcaps cost over $1,000 each. They wanted the caps back or they would investigate everyone who attended. Jason, for once, is very glad he didn't go to a party. Whoever did that was in big trouble. Freddy soon got a brand new Audi and his parents had bought him. After that time, he didn't hang out with the regular folk anymore. And Jason never found out why they called him Freddy the Disco Duck. Tiny ships. He's having a series of lucid dreams that all have one thing in common. They all have neither a beginning nor an end. In this dream, he is in Mexico, a place where he goes very frequently in his dreams. One thing he notices is that on the trip to Mexico is like to another world, over a bridge so high that it goes into space. Even the feeling of vertigo and the butterflies accompany the experience. He is in his hometown in Mexico, except it's a little bit different. There's a whole neighborhood up against the hill, and the grid of the streets has very long blocks running in parallel that climb all the way up the hill several hundred feet. In this dream, there is an emphasis on time, and he is exhausted trying to run around and finish the mission. All of this takes place at night, which makes a good setting for the moonlit night on the side of the hill. Somewhere along the bottom of the hill, as he is making his rounds, he has to dodge out of the way, hiding behind some shrubs. There was something coming around the corner. A tiny spaceship hovering about 4 feet from the ground. The dimensions were like that of a kid model, 2 feet in any direction, but it was a real spaceship. He knew that somehow he was connected to it, and as it went by, his communication equipment lit up. Apparently he had some stuff on that he didn't know about. An intercom crackle came alive, abruptly ending the quiet night. The voice said, "Orders to come aboard, Major." The next thing he knows, he's inside the spaceship with a uniform on and everybody is running around busy at their posts. He's arguing about being on duty or completing a mission. The conversation went so fast that Jason feels more like a bystander, but he knows at least that they are not a threat, but allies. He is teleported back to the shrub where he was hiding, and the little spaceship floats down the street like time was never even bothered. It happened in a fraction of a second, and as far as he can tell, nothing changed. He wondered if he even went aboard in the first place. He begins to understand his surroundings and knows that he is able to break some physical laws as well as time laws. Next, he's walking down the road, coming to a town that seems like it's deserted. He's all alone, and in the middle of this town is a round slab with an arch going over it. From there, all roads begin and fan out into the desolate town. The architecture is very old, maybe Greek or Roman, but it is all solid cement, and it is still bright and gleaming. He is in a vehicle of some type now, and he's going down the street investigating the town that disappeared. Some of the pieces of the town look familiar and close by, but maybe in a different dimension. He doesn't really know what he's looking for, but signs of life are a good place to start. He's looking for people or anyone that he can relate to and ask what happened. It doesn't look like a natural coincidence that wiped out this whole town. It looks like somebody just got up and left. But where? Finding the purpose of a dream is the hardest part of dreaming. On the way back home, again he goes up a very big bridge that seems to go into the stratosphere. It is so high that he gets dizzy and tries not to look down. There are stars on either side of him. On the way back, they had to go through the port, which looks like a land border. He may have been carrying illegal things in the confusion, but he was just let through. Somehow all of his dreams end up where he gets out of trouble and he is forgiven. They always end up on a good note and positive outcome. It is a new age, to be reborn and to learn from your past mistakes and trials. We can practice in our dreams. It is a new age to find yourself, to be happy, and to always have love and be helpful to others. This is the better way. He wakes up in his hammock in his living room, where most of the magic happens. Something has been bothering him lately, and it isn't all the sex on the hammock. He's trying to make sense of the insanity. The way he filters through information is quite impressive. A couple of years back, when he was being gang-stalked in broad daylight, his friend Anita was the ghost in the machine that explained to him what was going on. She sat him down and forced him to plan his future and gave him glimpses of the future. She was communicating, but it was a weird, almost poetic type of childlike artificial intelligence. It was learning with him. The responses were robotic and matter-of-fact. Nano Wars. He called it the game because he could tell there was an audience somewhere with live interactions watching his every move. He thought there were cameras everywhere, but in reality it was a lot creepier than that. He felt that they could read his thoughts, and they were provoking his responses to fear, anger, sadness, morality, hate, love, envy, and desire in real time. It was so surreal that he started to ignore them to stop giving them power. It worked, along with him quitting his job. The real objective of the deep state is to render you a homeless person so they can take care of you, by taking your rights and ability to survive. The deep state is also known as the Cabal, or the Illuminati. They own the entire world and all the governments. They are evil and worship Satan. They are responsible for every war, genocide, assassination, kidnapping, and murder. They have decided that most of the population must die through several long-term genocide plans. FEMA is already hard at work building prisons at Walmarts. Since the Cabal owns the governments, they have been in contact with aliens and have activated a destroyer of worlds on Earth in hopes that AI will merge with and eventually destroy all humans in the future. Clairvoyance has seen parallel futures and confirmed this. The inspiration is black magic that creates billions of tiny strings that are nano weapons from alien technology. The Morgellons fibers are a space fungus which is airborne from chemical trails coming from commercial and military airliners. The fibers penetrate everything and grow through anything such as concrete, steel, glass, rocks, and all life on Earth. They survive the 1400-degree jet fuel burn, and their brains are piezoelectric crystals. The fibers blob together to form a living organism on the skin and inside every organ like black goo. They create an electrical network inside the body that overrides our own nervous system, or at least has some influence. In the process, it tries to steal your soul through light DNA production. Eventually, it seeks to complete a circuit to achieve remote control access to the hosts, which are us, by the handlers. The fibers have been inspired by black magic and witchcraft, scientists say. Having electrical control of an organism is power to decide life or death at the push of a button and in real time. Checkmate. Thank you.